Faculty of Math and the Internet Project, I wish to welcome you to this very special event. This seminar is given by the recipient of this year's J.W. Graham Medal in Computing and Innovation. And this special award, by the way, is given every year at the spring convocation. I believe we're now to number 7. We are all so delighted that it is Terry Stepien that is this year's recipient. Terry is president of iAnywhere Solutions. And as is custom, the recipient has to speak before he gets his medal. So
Sing your medal.
I worked with Terry before he left the University of Waterloo, and it was always a lot of fun. Very hard worker, but always very, very pleasant. If I have one memory of Terry, it is that he's always smiling. And I think it's still the case today. So Terry received both his Bachelor of Mathematics and his Master's of Mathematics here at the University of Waterloo. And I think he first started working with the Computer Systems Group. I think that was your first job at the University
January
of Waterloo.
1978.
I don't want to say anything more at this point because Don Cowan, the director of the Computer Systems Group, is to introduce Terry. So I don't want to say too much because Don has that all prepared. So without any...
It's a great pleasure for me to give a short introduction to Terry Michael Chuck Stepien. And we'll tell you afterwards at the reception why we call him Chuck. A few of us, of course, know that. I've known Terry for a long time. I guess just counting up, it's almost a quarter of a century now. That sounds like a long time. He first started with the Computer Systems Group in January 1978, where he was a co-op student. He then continued in that co-op student role until he joined the group as a professional colleague, research assistant, moved on to be associate director. And then, just about the time I took over the group, I think it was about April 1992, he left. I don't know if that's a comment on my management style or whether faraway fields just look greener, but we'll assume that he wasn't too annoyed with me. Terry, of course, then moved up the street to Whatcom, which morphed into PowerSoft, which morphed into Sybase, and then Terry morphed Sybase into iAnywhere Solutions, which is a subsidiary of Sybase, but a pretty independent one. Terry is, of course, the president of iAnywhere Solutions and is currently driving in the direction of what is being called M-commerce, not e-commerce, but M-commerce, mobile commerce. I assume that stands for. It doesn't stand for your middle initial or anything like that. And he's going to talk to us about that today. As you can see, go mobile and get wireless. So, Terry.
Well, thanks, Don. And as I was preparing for today, a number of people asked me, was I worried about the preparation for today? And I said, well, let's just think about it. As I look around the room, it sort of looks like family, all the folks I've worked with for years. And then I quickly realized that, in fact, Don, it is a quarter of a century that since I first started my association with the University of Waterloo and Don Cowan and Wes Graham at that time, back in September of '76 when I started here. And I thought, gee, that's not really a lot to worry about. And then I thought about it some more and said, what is the most worrisome part? And I thought, it's going to be Don's introduction. That's going to be and since I'm past that now, I really feel like I can proceed. As was mentioned, I'm with iAnywhere Solutions, and we're a subsidiary of Sybase, and we're involved in mobile and wireless solutions. And we'll go through today and tell you a little bit about us, what we do, and what we're involved with. And then we'll take a look at what's happening in the mobile and wireless world as we head into what we feel is the next revolution in computing. And if you think back, we've come, in fact, in the 25 years I've been involved with the university, we've come from a mainframe-centric environment into the 80s where we had a client-server-centric environment, into the 90s where we had an internet-centric environment, and now in the new millennium we're moving into a wireless and mobile environment, and there's a number of changes that affect that, and some of the areas we'll try to highlight today indicate where this affects the software. As this university has long been associated with software and software development, we'll try to highlight some of the changes and some of the areas that still require research and work in this area, and we'll also attempt to do a demonstration of some of this technology. Some of you who got here earlier witnessed the first law of demonstrations, which is, we tested it out a week ago, and then we came in this morning and set it up. We went away to get a bite of lunch and came back, and of course, something had broke. Fortunately, the AV department, of which I notice I have them standing by in case something else happens as I look around the room, managed to get us the new components, and it looks like we're off to the races. So a little bit about IMR Solutions. Ian McPhee, who's up front here, as many of you are aware, is the founder of Watcom. And one of the comments Ian made to me a while ago is he was very glad we called it iAnywhere for the following reason. He said, good job on the name. I'm not sure that's exactly what we had in mind, but we'll take that for today. That was exactly the strategy we had. As I put together a brief history of what we've been doing over the last several years, I took the liberty of starting it in 1992, which is where I had actually become involved in it. This chart could go back further, and perhaps we can have that discussion at the reception later. Really, if you look at it, what we've accomplished over the last number of years is we've successfully created software that has assisted in moving information, namely enterprise information, from the corporate systems in either mainframes or large servers, and we've enabled that movement down to laptops, and as you see, later on onto handhelds, and more recently onto cell phones. And as we evolve, we're really moving that information to wherever you need it, anytime you need it. And that really affects the computing paradigm. If you think about the browser-centric environment of the internet, that's an environment where you very much go out and start looking for what you want to find. It's very much an environment where you're pulling the information as you need it. As we move into this mobile-centric environment, it's very much an environment where you push the information. And the challenge on the software is to push just the information you need when you need it. And you'll see as we look at some of these devices, there are definitely challenges on these devices in terms of the size of the screen and the speed of the processor and all those things which we'll look in a bit more detail later. So we've had the good fortune of evolving with this mobile environment and had a number of industry awards. One which we're very proud of is that over the last 4 years, we have led the industry in the mobile database space, and although this year's ratings are not out yet, it looks like we may be headed for the 5th year as we hear in the next 5 or 6 weeks about that. Let's look at what's what we'll call the technology adoption rate. I think this is an interesting graphic as you try to put together some metric of how fast people adopt technology. And if we look in using the benchmark of saying how fast does someone get to 50 million users, just as a somewhat arbitrary threshold, but using the same measurement against a number of technologies. And if we look, when radio was introduced, it took 38 years to get to that number of users. But as we move forward in time, notice the internet only took 5 years to get there. And what we've seen in the M-business in the mobile space is it's only taken 2 years. In fact, we have some analyst comments that indicate we're well past the 50 million mark in that 2-year period. And in fact, we're heading to somewhat astronomical numbers relative to what we've ever had to deal with as a software industry. When you're having to deal with in excess of 200 billion wireless messages a day moving around, that changes the infrastructure. That changes how your software needs to operate. How do you keep that system running on a 24/7 basis? How do you get that information close enough to the users so that it's there when they need it and there isn't excessive latency in the system? The other comment here by Jack Gold from Meta Group is that this revolution is happening both in the corporate world and in the consumer world. Meta Group's focused on the corporate world, but it's also true that these devices are quickly moving into the consumer space. And if we look at just some of their other comments, these are comments made recently as we enter into the new millennium. If you look at it, we're seeing that as an overall comment, people are moving more and more to mobility. They're moving away from fixed desktop units to laptops, and they're moving away from laptops that are wired into the network to laptops that are wireless, like this one up front. In fact, as we set up the system here today, one of the things we did is we set up a little wireless LAN up front. So running in the room is a 11 megabit wireless LAN that's running both the laptop and the handheld units. And as I put on the microphone for the TV camera, I looked at the microphone for the room and I said, if I turn on that many pieces, I'm apt to blow up front here. So I thought, hopefully people can hear me enough without turning on one more wireless device up front here. But if needed, we'll get the microphone for later. What are some of the areas where this technology is being used? Certainly an awful lot in the area of field and Salesforce enablement. All those applications in business where you're trying to get information to your mobile workers. Whether they be sales personnel going out visiting customers, whether they be people at remote offices, or whether they're service personnel and you're trying to get them information about the next service call or information about the inventory. These are all areas where we've seen a lot of applications being built. In the consumer space, at least up until, I say, recent events in the stock market, stock trading applications were very popular and somewhat less popular these days. But other areas that we've been involved with are so-called kiosk systems. And those are the kinds of systems you'll see in the malls around. One of the projects we were involved with was with Kodak, and you may have seen those Kodak color watch systems that are in place that allow you to scan an image and print out a copy of it right away. Those are all running technology developed locally here in Waterloo at Anywhere Solutions. So we've been involved in a number of those systems. Other ones would include the U.S. Postal Service, and the list goes on with the hundreds of applications we've been involved with. If we look back at some of those applications and try to summarize what are some of the challenges that you run into that you need to address in these types of systems. Well, first of all, if you're involved in wireless, it is certainly the case in wide area wireless that the coverage is limited. And the kinds of things we hear when we work with some of our customers is that if you're in one of the major cities, the wireless coverage is pretty good. But if you get away from them, all of a sudden things don't look quite so good. And they're busily working on that problem, but it is a problem today, and it looks like it'll be a problem for the foreseeable future. Also the case is on these networks that are in place, if you do get coverage, the speed is quite slow compared to what you would be used to in the normal wired environment. You're looking at speeds in the order of kilobytes instead of megabytes in terms of what they do, and that affects the applications and affects the way you design them, in that the kinds of things you see happening today is that most of the applications are heavily text oriented, and you don't see a lot of graphics and other rich text objects appearing because of those limitations. Other ones that you certainly run into is that as you use these wireless devices, you quickly figure out that the battery life is a major problem, in that it is true that even on a standard cell phone today, you can have standby time of 4 or 5 days. The talk time is in the order of hours, and the difference being how much do I need to transmit versus how much can I receive. And when you're running an application, generally speaking, it's two-way communications, and you're dealing a lot with that battery life scenario. Other challenges is that, generally speaking, throughout the industry, there's a lack of understanding of how to develop these kinds of apps. The kinds of tools that are in place today are not of the same level that we saw even in the era of building browser-based applications. They're very early tools, and they're effective and they do work, but there's a limited set of people who know how to use them. And the so-called one-touch application is really, I call it a buzzword that's happening in the industry to try to deal with the characteristics, of devices such as these. You want to be able to have an application where you minimize the number of actions you have to do to get to the piece of the application you need. So the applications are changing to try to capture that so-called, let's try to get it all done with one touch of the pen. Other challenges, certainly we refer to it as connection stew. Anybody who's looked into this is certainly very familiar that no matter where you go, you can almost be assured it's a different set of infrastructure than you previously had seen. And as you look at it, for some of you will be familiar with this, as we worked at the university here throughout the 80s on local area networks, it was certainly the case that we had this connection stew problem in local area networks through that time period. But then, people standardized on Ethernet, and no one even thinks about that anymore. That kind of standardization has not happened in this mobile and wireless space yet. And as you move around, you find all sorts of incompatible systems that are at various stages of their evolution. Certainly another challenge is that there is a multiple device environment. If we look even just, the ones I have up front here, you have phones, you have PDAs, you have a number of different types of devices. And the difference is that in these devices, there isn't one common operating platform. If you look towards a PC-centric environment, pretty much Windows is the standard development environment. If you look in the browser environment, well, you've got a choice of two. It could either be Internet Explorer or Netscape, but generally speaking, you don't have a large number. As you move into this space, there's probably 60 or 70 different systems. Now, there has been some convergence recently, and that convergence seems to be towards systems based on Pocket PC or systems based on Java. But there is still a large number of systems out there. And what that translates to is that when people are developing applications, they have to support a large number of platforms. And for those of you who've attempted to do that, you find out that it's a very challenging project, and it does lead you towards, I'll call it a lowest common denominator solution, where you're trying to support something that works across all those platforms. Just a little bit about some of the things we've been working on. As you saw earlier, our core product that we've developed is called SQL Anywhere, and somehow in the US that becomes SQL Anywhere, but it loses something on the translation there. But where we've been focused in our efforts is to take that data-centric platform together with its synchronization and allow you to extend that into this environment we've just described for mobile and wireless. And the areas that we've been addressing in our recent work is areas such as data synchronization. How do you figure out exactly what data on the device needs to be transferred back to the server system and vice versa? And there's certainly a lot of effort put into how do you minimize that amount of transmission because of the bandwidth constraints that we mentioned earlier. Other areas revolve around content delivery. This really could be described as reformatting of the information. You're taking it from a server-based system that has a certain size of screen and a certain format, and you're trying to put it down to one that has maybe 4 or 5 lines and a very small amount of data. So there's a certain amount of translation happens. Other areas that we've been working on involve connecting up to the rest of the information that exists within the organization, whether that be to an organization's portal environment or their content environment where they've collected all their system as a large browser-based environment, or whether it goes directly into their enterprise data and applications, and in parallel, keeping track of all the user preferences and user profiles so that you only have a single environment for that type of information. The areas we'll look at in some detail today are in the area of the thin client, and I'll refer to it as the ultra-thin client, and what we refer to as the smart client. So we'll look at 2 of those areas as areas that we've been working on, and I'll show you some of that. Hopefully, if the equipment cooperates, we'll show you an example of that as well. So if we look across the breadth of devices and we want to determine how you administer a solution to those environments, you'd like it to work across a wide range of connection environments. So whether it be a personal area network like the new emerging Bluetooth ones where you could have a small LAN environment with approximately a 10-meter radius, or you get into a wireless LAN environment like the one we have set up front here where you can probably go in the order of 50 meters from that access point and still get reasonable speed, to a wide area network, which is using the carrier system as the backbone environment. Let's look at some of the characteristics involved. In an ultra-thin client environment, and just to define what that is most people will be familiar with the thin client or browser-based applications that have been in the industry for a number of years. The ultra-thin refers to taking that type of environment and bringing it down to a smaller screen and smaller environment. And certainly the advantage of that type of system, as we've all experienced in the internet world, is that there's no deployment concerns. And for those of you in the room who are involved in IT solutions, you certainly recognize that trying to deploy and manage applications to hundreds or thousands of these devices is problematic, and so browser-based applications have been very popular for a number of years. We're also, within the ultra-thin client environment, you're supporting multiple devices, but on all devices it looks like a browser or some shape and form. Now the difference you'll find as you look in this device space is that not all browsers run HTML, so they're not just exactly like Internet Explorer or Netscape. In fact, you'll find that there are many proprietary browsers where there's a system that has its own markup language and its own server that does that translation. But in an ultra-thin client environment, all the logic remains on the server. And in this type of environment, you're generally working with various markup languages. And it's interesting, as you write them down, you find out that it pretty much sets itself up geographically. So as you work in Europe, you'll run into a lot of WAP or WML. As you work in North America, there's a lot of compact HTML. And as you move over to Asia, especially in Japan, there's a lot of HDML, especially in the Docomo environment. So you have a number of markup languages, but fundamentally the problem is similar in that you're dealing with a transcoding type solution where you're taking it from one markup language to another and attempting to make it appear on the screen. In terms of smart client, this is an area we feel that the industry is headed, is in the area of a smart client environment for a number of reasons, and some of which we'll see today, is that as you have some of the information on the client device, you can take advantage of a number of the characteristics of these devices, not the least of which is color, sound, certainly a more rich user interface environment than you would get if you're doing things exclusively in a browser. In this type of environment, you have some storage on the device, which is managed by a data store on the device, as well as synchronization capabilities to bring that information back and forth from your enterprise solution. Other things you'll find that are characteristics of this type of application is that you'll have messages or alerts of certain things that are important. So if it's a banking application, it'll come out and say, you're about to be overdrawn, would you like to move some money? It'll come out and tell you that. And as I mentioned, the interface can be very rich because it's running locally on the machine, and the performance is, generally speaking, better than you would get in a thin client environment. So let's take a look at a little application we've put together, and I'll just give you some background on it before I bring it up on the screen here. We've made a little example. We do an awful lot of work with healthcare providers, so we've taken the liberty of making a small example we call Medical Mart. And in Medical Mart, there's an environment where, very typical environment where there's a manager who's in the office who keeps track of a number of reps in the field, and that manager is responsible for approving orders and discount levels, and the person in the field is getting orders and getting the customer information approved. So in this environment, we are going to show a system running in the browser. We will use an emulator for a WAP phone to show it running on a phone, given that coverage in the room here is not up to being able to run the phone here. And then we'll also show it running on a PDA type device with synchronization between them. And if all that works, we just have to have a big sigh of relief. So here's the logon screen, and I think as I was preparing this, I thought, I'm not just sure what Don Cowan's going to say, but I think we'll just have Don be the manager here today. He always liked that spot. And I'm the sales rep on this one. So let's, yeah. Realize none of the information or customers in here is real, as you might have guessed. It's strictly for demonstration technology. So within this system, Don is the manager, can look at any orders that I have pending, that I've taken from customers. He can look in some detail of the orders, and you can actually see, where the customer has signed for that order. He can see all the various people that I'm working with, as well as he can look at all the product levels and the inventory in the system. So if we were to switch it over here, so as I look at my system, I can see all the customers that I have, and I'm going to just check to see if Don has approved any orders yet, and he hasn't. So he's only done the one.
Doesn't sound like me.
But I figure that's okay. I'm going to go put another one in anyway, just perchance he'll get around to approving these. Oops. So I'll put the order in. It's hard to work around this camera a bit. I think this guy, I've actually sold him some chin implants, so probably some Tylenol makes sense at this point. And he likely needs a lot of it. And since he needs a lot of it, we won't give him much of a discount. Standard sales procedure. And so that order's in there. And I will synchronize it back. And we'll see if the good Dr. Cowan can see it on his system here. So if he looks at all the pending orders, sure enough, there's that new one in there. And if we look at the details, you'll find that great signature I did there. And so we look at the pending orders. At this point, if Don were at his desk, he could simply approve this order and I would see it. But we recognize, of course, that it's Friday afternoon and there's probably little chance of him being at his desk. So probably more importantly, we'll show you how you can do this off a cell phone, because he's likely at the golf course or something. So we can have him sign on here. Gee, Don, I don't know your password. I'm going to guess it's nothing. Don doesn't like passwords. So hopefully this will connect up here. Hear that, Don, or you're going to have to get back to your office if we don't connect up here. I'll just let that work on that for a second. Nope. Network not available. Well, what we'll do is we'll make Don go back to his office. We'll go back to his office and we'll say, okay, we're going to approve this one. And we're going to update it such that now, when I go back to the device and do a refresh of the information, I'll see that he's actually, hopefully we can see that he's approved that order. That's the one right at the bottom, the Tylenol one. So he has approved that. So this is a small example of how you can have an environment that is running between a server that has a browser-based system. Hopefully, in most cases, the cell phone system would allow him to connect up to the network and bring that back. Or someone can be operating on a PDA. In this case, the PDA is running wireless as well. In this particular example, we're using 802.11 wireless to the device right here, but equally so, I could have pulled this out and put any wireless network card in here and used the wide area networks as well. We'll just look at one other example, if we can get it all running here, of this. And this particular device is a brand new one we just got in. So every new device, we just have to try it out. This particular one is from Casio, and it's a little bit larger than the other ones, and it's a ruggedized version. Now, the first question people ask me when I say it's ruggedized, they say, why don't you drop it? And I say, well, because I only have one, and I'm not sure how ruggedized it really is. But apparently it's supposed to be okay from 3 feet, but we're not going to try it just yet. Maybe later at the reception we'll give it a little test. But we'll just leave it for the moment. But anyway, what it has is it's a ruggedized version. It has a little keypad for entry on it. It also has a built-in 802.11 LAN inside the machine, as well as the ability to put in a wide area network card. So it's a pretty nice machine in its capabilities. And what I wanted to run on this one today is an interesting one. And I'll give you the background on this one once I get it up on the screen. This goes along with Don being at the golf course. Just, these all tie together. Just by way of background, this particular application we've just been working on. And one of the events that we sponsor is an LPGA golf tournament. It's coming up in July. It's called the Big Apple Classic. And at this event, there's I don't know if you're familiar with this, but before most major sporting events, at least in the golf arena, there's a Pro-Am tournament. And this is where the pros come in and embarrass the amateurs. But generally speaking, they're good sports about it when they do it. I remember previously we've sponsored a tennis tournament, and I'll tell you, those tennis pros are really good. They're really quite good, and I'm sure the golf pros are as well. So what we've created is an application for keeping track of your score on the golf course, and you might say, well, that's easy, I just write it down. This particular tournament is a scramble, so it's one of these ones where it's the best ball counts. And one of the things we've discovered, we've done similar versions of this before, is that when you have one of these scramble events, it's really interesting to see who's in the lead. If you've ever played one of those golf events, you'll recognize that as you're out on the course, you know, people start on different holes, they start at different times. You never know if you're winning or losing. This particular application knows how to synchronize back so that it tells you who's in the lead. And it's amazing how competitive these events become when you know you're only one shot behind. Now, I suspect people cheat, but, but it's probably still competitive. So what we've done, and unfortunately we're losing a bit on the light here, is we've created the application where you can put your score and who's got the longest drive. But we also went a little further just to show you some of the advantages that you can get by having one of these smart client applications where you can put some of the information on the device itself. Is we have information about the hole that in the bottom left-hand corner, in your bottom left-hand corner, is the actual entire course. And up in the top left-hand corner is a blow-up of the hole, and that's the hole on the right. And you know, if you're like me, you never know just exactly how to play these holes, so if you just touch it, it gives you some hints on how to best play the hole. And then the other thing we discovered when we did this is, you know, sure enough, most golfers are getting a little older, and they can't just see that picture. So we've allowed them the ability to get a larger version of it, so that they can take a look at the hole. And if you look closely, it tells you all the distances from where you are. If you're that skilled a golfer, that distance makes a difference in what club you use. Or if you're like me, you just wail away at it and hope you get there. Okay, let's just, in the final few minutes here, let's just take a look at where we see things heading from here. Where do we see a lot of work and a lot of effort being put in by both the hardware vendors and the research community? Is there's an awful lot of work in this space being done on what's referred to as location-based applications. And the net of that is that if you can determine, you know, where this device is, it can really assist you on providing the information you need. You know, examples become, if you're in a city you're not familiar with, it could give you all the restaurants in a 100-meter radius of where you're standing. And those type of things can be done if you can locate the machine. So there's a lot of work being done to gather that type of technology in these machines so that you can actually do that. And it's being done in several ways. Some, I guess probably the most effective today is through GPS type, although there's a lot of work being done in the cellular system to be able to triangulate the cells to be able to get you that information as well. So certainly, this is an area to watch for as you move forward and study this arena. Another area is, interesting enough, is voice. And you might say, well, why would voice be popular again? That's sort of what we had before. Are we not coming full circle on this arena? And what's happening is that as you create these systems, there are always going to be occasions when you're outside of coverage. And when you have a voice system, the idea is that you can probably get to a phone. And the voice system will provide exactly the same information that the data system does as well. So they're connected together, and it's interesting because everyone is working towards a voice tagging language called VoxML, which is another tagging language like the ones we looked at earlier, and it's giving an environment where you can get that voice response system up to the level where you'd want to use it as part of your delivery system. Certainly, as we look forward, another area is what we call the networked world, is that as people continue to put large investments in the infrastructure of cabling all these systems, there's a lot of benefits coming, and we've talked about some of the ones on the handheld and the cell phone, but there's also a lot of work being done on the networked home. And if we just focus in on that for a moment, we're working closely with a partner and doing a number of projects, primarily in Asia, actually in Hong Kong and China, where they're installing complete smart homes. And these smart homes not only keep track of things such as what's your power consumption and could you be using a different provider that's cheaper. The other area they do, which is particularly beneficial, I don't know if you ever watch those television commercials with all those different phone plans. Can you ever figure out which one's cheaper at what time of day? Well, these guys actually program that all in, much, I'm sure, to the chagrin of the phone companies, and it knows exactly which one's cheaper for your phone call each time you make a call. So it goes out and sends it out there. Other things it does is it monitors the infrastructure in your house to know whether the furnace is working or the water heater is leaking and all those things. As well, it's all hooked into your home security system, and it brings it together as a small panel, usually in the kitchen, where you can have a home network system in a very low-cost environment. So it's a system that gets installed into the home for less than $1,000, and it's being put in, as we speak, in a number of new apartment complexes in Asia. The last area I want to touch on, and I just got to check the audience on this one. How many people read Dilbert in the group? Oh, a few Dilbert readers. Okay, for those of you who read Dilbert, you'll be very familiar with this. Dilbert is a comic strip run in many of the local papers, and it really, I think, is the source for a lot of research in technology. Everybody thinks Dilbert works at their company, and although we've been assured that he doesn't. And so as we start looking at what the devices look like in the future, so we've been talking a lot about software, and as we move forward, we see, well, look, now the phone is becoming smarter because now inside it's a PDA as well. So you get sort of these integrated devices. So I went out and looked and said, what's Dilbert think about all these? And I think he's just about got it figured out. So what people are looking for is a series of integrated devices all in one. And for those of you interested Dilbert readers, this was from May the 30th of this past month. And if you're interested, you should look at the one on the 31st, because it shows you the battery that he needs to run all this. Anyway, that's all I wanted to cover today. I think at this point we're going to open it up for a certain number of questions.
Yes, please. I invite the audience to ask Terry some questions. So who wants to go first? John.
Hey, how far away are we from getting rid of the keyboard interface to purely voice?
I was going to answer that one too. You said purely voice. I had to think about purely. Certainly, we're at the space where voice is a very capable solution. I don't think we're there, even though we've all seen it on Star Trek 30 years ago. We can't just quite do it yet. We can't totally replace it. Although I'm looking forward to the day when I can walk in the house and say, computer on, and it goes. But no, in seriousness, the voice solution, as we move forward into this VoxML space, where it's actually based off a tag language, and that tag language is similar enough to what we're using in the data world, I think that gets us there. Because then people, as they develop their applications, don't have to do that much special for voice. The problem with voice has always been, you do the project and you say, oh, time to do voice. It's sort of like, it's like when we develop software, in some cases when we develop software, I have to be careful here. In some cases we develop software, we say, has somebody thought about running this in Asia? And we go, ooh, gee, little problem there, localization problem. In any event, I think voice will become more popular and may get there now that people can get to it through a tag-based language.
And ladies before gentlemen.
Another issue is vision, Terry. These babies are getting smaller. We're getting older.
Yeah. Yeah. That is certainly true. A number of these devices have capabilities for that. It's quite likely, if we go back to John's question, that voice may well help in that area. It is certainly true that you can have some of the capabilities for vision on these, but that further amplifies the problem of screen real estate. So you very quickly run out of it. I'd say it's not one that's well addressed today, and there's the only place I've seen it addressed, and I wouldn't say that it's by any means mainstream, is there's a company we work with out of Denver that has produced, it's a set of glasses that are actually a VGA screen that you can put on, and it's really incredible. Now, you look very strange on the airplane when you do this, but it actually works very well, and a lot of work is being done using that type of technology to deal with vision, because then you've got the larger screen real estate to deal with.
With the teenage killer app, where I usually learn things like Napster, I had no idea that this was going to be a major thing. I won't mention pornography. But anyway, other things like cell phones, teenagers, that they don't call, they hang up sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just connected.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Is this a place where, like, every person at a geriatric home has to have one of these or something like that?
Well, I think so. Well, let me answer your teenager one first. I don't know that the teenage one has been completely resolved, but it appears that teenagers like having two-way pagers. And looking into it, you might wonder why that's the case. And I think it's the following, is that if they send you a little message on the pager and it shows up as an email, they don't have to answer any follow-up questions like they could get on the voice call, right? So it's very quickly that says, I'm going to be late, right? They don't have to, there's no why. Right? So it's a very quick environment. So, and as a result of that, they've invented a whole language, right? So I don't know if you guys have seen this or not, but sometimes you'll see like POS. That's parent over shoulder, right? And there's a whole bunch of these you have to learn because they're communicating in a completely different world than us. And so it's very dangerous that way. But in terms of the latter part of your question, it appears that this type of technology is catching on very, very rapidly with seniors. It is very much the case that many seniors are on email. They certainly are on the internet, and they're using these systems far more than was ever the case in the past. And I think that that trend is going to continue. If you look at the demographics of the population, where it's heading, I think you're going to see that become more and more of an area where people pay attention to it.
John, do you have a question?
Yeah, there's, you may not be quite old enough, Terry, but you remember the Dick Tracy watch?
Oh, man, yes, I do. There's no good answer to that question, is there? If I say no, then he doesn't think I know the area. If I say yes, he thinks I'm old.
The question really is that we're carting around a lot of extra appliances right now.
Yep.
Frankly, the fewer things I can carry, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on what's going to happen there? Now, a watch is great if you want to tell the time, but it's pretty rotten if you want to show a map or a golf.
Well, I don't know about a map or a golf, but I was just recently in Japan, and I had the opportunity to meet with the people who founded Casio. And I didn't bring it today. As soon as you said that, I wish I'd wore it, right? Is they actually have a Casio watch that's a digital camera. It is incredibly cool because you can like, it can take, I believe it can take 20 pictures and then it can infrared right into your machine. It's incredibly cool. I'll have to show you sometime. In terms of being able to use it as a replacement, I think we're a ways away from that. I certainly know the problem you have, and I think the kind of thing you're going to see before you get to the solution that you're looking for, you're going to see people invent carrying cases. In fact, I was recently at a trade show in Toronto, and somebody came up to me, and they had this thing that sort of went over your shoulder and down the side, and there was like 6 pockets in this thing, and then there's a place for the battery on the back, right? And I looked at it, and my first reaction was to, as Shirley mentioned, was to smile. I thought, no, this guy's dead serious, right? Anyway, if you're interested, I have his business card, how to get those.
I mean, that combination, I noticed that there are no video or TV audio stuff, just sound system.
Oh, in here? In what I did today?
I mean, yeah, that combination.
Oh, in here? Oh, I see. Oh, you mean in this particular one? I think that warrants an email to Scott Adams. I think he missed something because he should have had the compact mini disc in there too while he was at it. I suspect what it is when you've got the rest of that stuff, I'm sure that somewhere in there's a place to put a compact mini disc, and then of course once you do that, then you can put the sound on it as well, and you can have it be some version of a Walkman, although you sort of walk it like a walker, I think. Yes.
Terry, there's a lot of talk about iMode in Asia or Japan particularly.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to come to North America?
Yeah, in fact, it's licensed to... Okay, the question is, there's a lot of talk about iMode. I'm going to restrict it to Japan probably, right? In Japan, for the most part. And it's been licensed to, I may have to get Dave, you ought to correct it here for me, is Sprint, I believe, has licensed it in North America. And when I met with them a few months back, I believe their plan is to have it rolled out just in time for the holiday shopping season, is what they're aiming for. I don't know if they'll make it. But for those of you not familiar with iMode, a very successful project that was started a couple of years back by NTT Docomo. And they fundamentally produced a high-speed LAN, and then there's a whole development community emerged around it. So you can actually get motion, video, and sound right on your phone. It's very good. Now, there are some problems with doing that in North America in that they definitely benefit in Japan from the geography, in that they can get the density high enough that they can get that speed. As you try to implement that here, I think the speed will be a lot slower than the 1 megabit they have, and as soon as you diminish the speed, the user experience follows the same curve as it goes down. But there's a lot of work on iMode. In fact, I was going to say, do I have the iMode phone? I don't have the iMode phone here. The phone I do have here is the Java phone, the Motorola Java phone, and iMode phones actually have Java apps as well, and there's a whole website of people creating Java apps. Now, interesting enough, I don't know if you guys do this, but I always like to look up there and see if there's a theme to the apps. And does anybody know what most of the apps do? They're up to most of the Java apps? No, they're not games. They actually change the ringer on the phone. So you can have a different ring pattern. Sometimes it sounds like the national anthem, and you can have all these different ring patterns. That's the most popular Java app on iMode, is changing the ringer. Now, interesting enough with iMode, we were doing some work earlier on with NTT Docomo, and most of what iMode is used for is voice today. They're currently only at about 8% of the usage on data, even though everybody has it. They're very low yet. Now they're hoping that increases, but so far it's mostly voice. And for those of you who had an opportunity to travel in Japan, you recognize that absolutely everybody has a cell phone. And in fact, in many parts of the world outside of North America, cell phone development is much further along than it is here, partly to do with the fact that they, I'll say, leapfrogged some of the wired technology we put in, and the other part due to the fact that for the most part they agreed on one standard to put in. So just like this one is a GSM phone, they pretty much all put GSM in, and that allowed the whole industry to move forward faster. Whereas you come to North America, and minimally you've got GSM, you've got TDMA, you've got CDMA, you probably got a bunch of analog hanging around, and there's probably a few others I missed as you move around the country. What that causes is a great problem for the device manufacturers, because they'd dearly like to make it for one, which is what's happening in Europe and for the in most part in Asia.
I get the great pleasure not only of introducing Terry, but thanking him, and I'll make this very short because obviously I have to get to the golf course. Chuck, as usual, showed his fine sense of humor and put me on the end of the pitchfork. And I guess I'd like to thank Terry very much for, what can I say, pulling us into this lecture and pushing all this excellent information on us and giving us a pretty good insight into M-commerce. Thanks again, Terry. I'm sorry, I forgot about this. We have a small gift.
Thank you.
Get the medal tomorrow.
Oh, thanks.